Thank you, Joe, for taking the time today and coming on the podcast. You are the head coach of the basketball team at Bishop O'Connell High School, where you're also the athletic director. You're chairman of the McDonald's All-American Game, and most relevant for me, you co-authored a book called "Coaching Basketball Successfully" with your father, Morgan Wootten, and having coached a JV basketball team this past winter, it was like my Bible for the season, where it really helped me just think about coaching high school kids and playing basketball for, from a very fundamental perspective, focusing on what's important and, not wasting a whole bunch of time on some of the details that just don't really move the needle. So super helpful for me, and it's great to be able to talk with you today. For those who may not know you, anything in addition that you might like to add to that, maybe talk about a little bit your story of how you got into coaching in the first place.
Sure. It's an honor to be with you, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you here today. I actually got into coaching, without even knowing it. I think, I'm the youngest of five, and one thing my father said, repeatedly is, Harry Truman, the president of the United States, used to say, find out what your children want to do, and if it's decent and honorable, advise them to do it. So he really never pushed basketball on me, even though he was a Hall of Fame coach. And I'm the youngest of five. And the reason I said that is my brothers are very successful in Wall Street. My sister ran a successful cheerleading business. My other sisters are very successful, but didn't get into basketball. And so I think it was my choice. And so without knowing it, I was around it all the time. And I'm sure my high school coaches, at the freshman JV level used to call me, I think it was Hewlett Packard. They had a commercial back when I was a kid called What If? On the financial side. And I would always say, well, what if they double on the weak side, the stagger, I would ask all these questions, like just play. So, I got into coaching, but basically after my freshman year of college, Mike Jones, who's my high school teammate, who just got the job at ODU, and I were working my dad's camp, and Mike was, playing at Old Dominion. And I remember, I'd heard my dad's JV coach had just gotten the Bulls job, who happened to be mine and Mike Jones's high school freshman coach, Mike Hibbs. And I knew he'd moved, his freshman coach up, and I didn't know who would help the freshman team. I was a walk-on at Maryland, and obviously I'd gotten hurt and didn't have any illusions of grandeur that I could play at that level, but enjoyed the experience and appreciate Coach Williams for allowing me to have it. And so then I said, who's going to be the assistant freshman coach? And my dad said, I don't know. And I said, I'd like to do it. And he said, that'd be great. And so I coached the JV summer league team at DeMatha. It was 19, and it was kind of the guys that hadn't made the varsity jump. And I just loved the connection with the kids. Riley Gore, a Prince George's County legend who ran the National Park and Planning summer league at Suitland High School. So good to me, and just good to all the kids in PG County. Just did a phenomenal job of running a great league. And I just love the connection with the kids. And after that, I just said, I just want to be a coach. And, I'm 51, so I started when I was 19, and I've loved every minute of it.
Yeah, it's an awesome story, and I think it's cool. I know, one thing I didn't mention, I guess, was you were, I believe, on one of your dad's only two undefeated teams. I think you guys were ranked like number 5 in the country at some point. Really, excellent program for many years, and you guys were among the best of the teams there. But one thing that was really interesting is I think your specific team actually like produced a lot of coaches as well, which might not have happened, from all of their good teams. I'm curious for you individually. Well, so first of all, is there anything like about that team that you think, led to having a bunch of coaches come out of it, or was it just sort of coincidence? And then secondarily, you mentioned that great quote about just sort of figuring out what your kids want to do and pushing them to do that as long as it's sort of a good thing. But did you know from a young age yourself that coaching was sort of on the horizon for you, or did it take a long time to sort of realize that that was actually what you wanted to do?
No, it's going to sound crazy. I never thought of it till that moment at the camp when I was 19. And maybe I had thought about it, but subconsciously, but I never thought about it, and then it kind of it was a decision, and I just went with it. So, so it was amazing. Maybe I was thinking about it without realizing it, but it was definitely the way I wanted to go. And I never looked back since. As far as that team, Dwayne Simpkins is the head coach at American. Old Dominion is Mike Jones. Obviously, I've been the high school coach at O'Connell for years. Vaughn Jones, who played at GW, was the head coach for quite some time at Coolidge High School, and it was just it was a special team because it may be one of the best teams I've ever been a part of, with the exception of a few other teams I've coached. Just incredible chemistry. We just made a decision to be better than our talent, and I think we did that. In fact, Danny Ferry, who's a good friend of mine, who obviously is the National Player of the Year in high school and college, we always debate because his team was national champions, but it was the way football used to be. It was a ranking, but they were 29-2, and we were 30-0, and so we always debate who was the best team, and so we all Dwayne and Mike and I always say we walked on the court 30 times and we got it done 30 times. So it's always a fun debate amongst the alums, but it was a special team. So it does not surprise me that so many of us coached, because I think we were kind of we just had a very high IQ as a team in high school.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And you talked about the chemistry of the team being able to play sort of above your talent. Obviously, that's a core element in coaching, to be able to try to facilitate that team chemistry, get your guys to play maybe above their skill level. As a coach now, are there things that you do, before the season, early in the season, throughout the season, that are sort of explicit attempts to either, directly or indirectly try to facilitate that team chemistry and build that bond between the players?
I would say a couple things. Number one, you want to talk about leadership, and I'm a big believer, if the team makes the decision and there's player leadership, that is huge for a team. If you don't have that, I don't care how talented or how good of a coach it is, you have to have team leadership. You have to have team ownership. So I think that's really big. I think you have to cultivate that as much as you can. And when you do that, that's when you have special teams. And it's interesting. Carlton Valentine played at DeMatha for my dad, and played at Michigan State. My dad always said he was the leader of the team when he was a senior. And he let people know the way things were going to happen on the team. And I think back to some of the great teams I've coached at O'Connell. Marcus Ginyard, who played in North Carolina, and Dave Neal and Brian Majors. They were 31-3 their senior year, and it was their team. And so I think having that ownership of their team. Obviously, the coach leads it, but they lead it in the locker room. They lead it in terms of the way we're going to do things. So I think, I've never seen a great team that didn't have player leadership, player ownership.
Yeah, so a couple questions sort of further to that. And an overall theme maybe from the book, Coaching Basketball Successfully, is there's some things in there that I actually wonder, like, I actually don't remember the publication date of the latest version. It's the third version of the book, having been updated already a couple of times. But I'm curious if there would be sort of updates to, what would then be like another version, more modern. Like there's certain things like, AAU basketball isn't mentioned really in the book, and I understand that's like a big part of things these days. And since this was my main resource, I didn't really have a good feel for like how AAU sort of involved with things. So we'll get to some of that stuff later, but I want to talk a little bit about what you mentioned, having like a player, the importance of player leadership, from a couple perspectives. One is that I know in the book, you guys talked about how you had the players basically create their own rules. So things like curfew and, no drinking, no drugs, stuff like that. Because, if you just sort of try to enforce that top down, it feels like a little bit of maybe, it's not as easy to buy in as if you make these rules for yourself as team and as players. And generally, when you put it in the players' responsibility to make those rules, they'll sort of hold themselves accountable to the same things that you would want to hold them accountable to as a coach. So I'm curious if that's still the route that you go on,
Yeah,
sort of the
absolutely. And,
rules.
I know. Yeah, and so I think my dad's goal with that was to give that ownership, that this is your team, you have to take care of it. So other things that he did that I thought were really good is at times have the team run the practice. So I didn't write a practice plan, and we're gonna have you run practice, or we're gonna have you run the next 5 drills, and then they have to take ownership of it, and then they have to figure out what they're gonna do. Hey, let you run practice,
Yeah.
you write the practice plan. So I think giving them ownership, that's not all the time, but that's a valuable thing, in terms of that ownership. I think also, It's interesting. Kids, people will say today, kids aren't as good anymore. Kids are this. I think kids are as good as they've always ever been. They want discipline. They want someone that cares about them. They want someone that believes in them, gives them confidence. I think parents are different today, but I think kids are just as good as ever. I think parents sometimes today don't allow their kids that growth opportunity that comes through adversity, that growth opportunity that comes through, working through things. And I think sometimes, that's the challenge of today's coaching is that, you have to do that. But again, I still love the kids. I love the fact that they are, there to get better, they're there to grow. And again, they want someone that believes in them, someone that believes that they're good enough and can help them get better. So I think that's really valuable. So I think that ownership is also a way to say you believe in them. It's a way to say this is your program, and we're going to guide it, but we're going to give you that ownership.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think there's it's great to have like support from your parents and everything like that. I was very, very fortunate to have pretty, unconditional support myself. But there's a difference between that and sort of like coddling or almost handicapping by not allowing the kids to sort of figure things out for themselves and get through the tougher times and the tougher moments with support, but without sort of fixing the issue for them or whatever it might be. Another, opportunity for player leadership is through the assignment of captains. How do you handle the captains? Is it a game by game? Is it season? You have season long captains. How do you go about that?
I never really have. I've never really assigned captains. When my dad did, I do team captains, or excuse me, game captains. Occasionally, I've assigned captains, or voted for captains when I think there's a need to elevate someone to a leadership position. And what I mean by that is they do a great job. They obviously need that support. So again, you give them that ownership. So if you see qualities in an individual that you may think needs that boost in front of the team, you may appoint them a captain. You may have them vote for captain. I think you have to adapt and figure out what's the best for that team. I don't believe you can put a banner on somebody and say, you're the captain. I think they have to have those leadership qualities. So I often think, like, as the athletic director, I've encouraged my coaches not to make such a big deal about captain, but make a big deal about leadership.
Yeah.
And I think there's a distinct difference is that, a captain's a name, leadership is action, is the ability to inspire others and work with others and things of that nature. So what I'm more interested in is leadership, not captains, if that rings true.
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense. So a couple of logistical questions about the program at Bishop O'Connell. You guys obviously have a varsity team, presumably JV as well. Do you have a freshman team? And how do you think about how many players to carry on each of those teams?
So we have a JV and a freshman team, and that's tradition in our league. Um, as I'm sure most schools have gone through this, back in the 50s, the high school sports were baseball, basketball, football. And so there were freshman teams at every level. But as has evolved, a lot of freshman teams have gone away, but we still have them in boys basketball because of the interest. So I usually keep about 12 on each JV, 12 to 13 on the JV freshman and the varsity team. And with the simple goal of, getting kids better, developing them. One thing I'm a big believer in, because we have a freshman team, I'm not going to put a freshman on the JV that's not going to play. I'm going to make sure he plays on the freshman team because I think you get better by playing. So I think that's a philosophy that we have. And, I think it's a great opportunity for them to represent their school and, again, use basketball to help them, learn how to get back up after they've been knocked down, work with others, be coachable, be resilient, be leaders, all those different things.
Yeah, there's a few different sort of variables in there that I think about that I'm trying to figure out what feels like the right number. Our program has just varsity and JV, and we carried like 15 on each roughly. And the difficulty is not only getting guys into games, but even just getting everyone to get involved with practice. You've got a lot of guys on the sidelines on a given time, but at the same time, you need to have enough to run 5-on-5. And if you have 11 guys and two guys are injured, you can't do that anymore. So 12 or 13 seems like probably enough to account for that. Would you bring a guy if you got, three or four guys injured on varsity, would you bring guys up from JV? Do you practice together ever, or it's all run separately?
No, so my kind of the magic number for me is between 12 and 14. I think it dictates basically what you feel is the right number for those kids. I think you have to be honest with the kids. Like if you're a 13th or 14th man, be honest. Like, look, you're in a practice role. You're an important part of the team, but I want you to take 24 hours to think about it and talk to your parents. And then come back to me. Are you comfortable with that role? Because I think it's the worst thing you can do is have somebody have an expectation that they're going to play, and then and the honest assessment is not. And I'll often kind of liken it back to my role as a walk-on. It didn't matter. I was an important part of the team, but it didn't matter what I was going to do. I wasn't going to play, but I was an important practice player. So I think you need to be honest with players. Like your effort's important, but don't believe, don't have, know what your role is, but know your role is important. So I think that's really important because I think in every business, not everybody can be the CEO, but that doesn't mean that you're not a really important part of the business. So I think it's a life lesson to learn. And then I think on the JV, if I didn't have a freshman team, I would keep 15 because I think you're looking for development of kids and things like that. And what I might try to do is if we didn't have a freshman team, is schedule, as many games as possible, and maybe have a 4 or 5 games designated for the bottom 7 or 8, and be honest with everybody. Look, these are games that we're gonna do more of a the freshman look or the bottom or 7 or 8, and just be honest with them. But everybody's important to the team, so that's how I would kind of approach it, I think.
Yeah, I think the clear communication and expectations of playing time and everything up front is kind of what stands out to me from that. You mentioned, if a freshman is not looking like they're going to get a lot of time on JV, you want them to be able to get more playing time. You'll put them on the freshman team so they can develop better. Would you do the same thing? Obviously, it's a case by case situation, but generally speaking, if you have someone who might be, the 13th player or something, like, a later player off the bench, if they're going to get any time at all on varsity, but they could be, a starter on JV. And let's say they're, like a sophomore or a junior. Would you hold them back on JV or put them up on varsity so they can get those varsity practices and get some game time? How would you think about something like that?
I've done it several ways. If there's a sophomore, I always feel like if you're going to be in our top 10, then as a sophomore, it's valuable to be on the varsity because, and again, you have to be clear with the parents. Like this, I see him getting better in practice. I've also had players that have practiced with the varsity and played JV games. And then I've had players that have, occasionally you bring a JV player up, once a week to get him some run with the varsity. If you think he's got good potential. And then I've had just 2 separate teams before. So I think it's dictated by the situation. And I always say this, I think you have to have flexibility and do what's right, by each of the players as well as the program.
Yeah, that all makes sense. And I think it goes with the general spirit of like we talked about the rules earlier. And I know one thing in the book, I think your dad took this from Red Auerbach, maybe, which was like basically the only rule is to have no rules. And the idea of that was like you don't want to make these really strict rules that you have to then abide by, like no matter what the context is always super important. And it sounds like with a lot of your decisions in a lot of different areas of the program, you leave yourself a ton of flexibility to make decisions on a case by case basis. And there's no hard rules. You might take a guy who's on JV and have him run with varsity 1 practice per week, like all of these different situations you just said. There's just a ton of flexibility to basically determine what you feel is best in the given situation. And I think that that makes a lot of sense. So when it comes to practices, it sounds like mostly it's varsity, JV, and freshman teams are practicing separately. How does that actually work on like a week by week basis? How many practices for, each of the teams? Are there scrimmages, where you have JV and varsity go at it for, one day in the preseason or something like that? Would love to just get a sense of like the overall scheduling.
So in terms of, traditionally we've practiced 3 separate teams, but this year we actually found it successful. We had our wrestling team, for a variety of reasons, started using our auxiliary gym because the wrestling room was too small, which we're converting into a team room for all teams. So it's going to be a win for everybody. But it kind of made us look at the gyms different. And we started practicing the freshman and JV together. Because number one, we found that it was 2 very competitive teams and it made their practices more competitive. but they absolutely have the freshman coach and the JV coach, so they kind of coach their teams and at times work together, at times work separately. So I think it was a really win-win, but not all the time. So obviously there was times they went separately. So I think again, there's no hard fast rules, but I found that to be very successful this year. So I think that was a win for everyone as far as for this year. And I think that one thing that we want is we want the freshman JV establishing the culture of the program and the expectations for the program.
Yep, no, that makes sense. And I think, in regards to playing time, I imagine your answer is going to somewhat reflect some of what you've said so far around flexibility and playing to the strengths of the team. But do you have any sort of guidelines or driving principles around like, hey, I'm going to have a main rotation of 8 or 9 guys, or you try to really find everyone a role? How do you think about distributing playing time and mostly just for the varsity on this one?
So I think on the varsity, it's different than the JV and the freshman. I think you want to try to, number one, for the freshman and JV, I want to play guys in roles that they're going to play on the varsity level. So I don't want, you want to expand guys' games, but we also want them to teach to play to their strengths. I always think everybody says work on your weaknesses, but make your strengths your strongest. So if you're a great shooter, work on that, and then you can build off that, and not to work, again, work on your left hand, but also work on your strength of your right hand. So if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I think that's really important. And then on the varsity level, I think, it's decided by 8 to 9 guys. One thing I've done better as I've coached longer is I've given guys more opportunities and part of this can be sometimes if there's not a solidified position. So for example, this year we had a very good year and we had 4 or 5 guards that, kind of rotated in there and out of there, not necessarily on a game to game basis, but kind of seeing whose day it was. But I think as they mature and I think we're going to have a great chance for player leadership next year, I think they'll solidify themselves more. I think, making sure that you're not burying a guy, but I still think you got to go with your top 9 or 10. But within those 9 or 10, give guys opportunities as the season progresses.
Yeah, no, totally. And I think last question on personnel. If you have a guy who, let's say it's a junior on JV who's solid, he's a leader on JV, he's maybe like the fourth starter or something like that, or even the sixth man. And when it comes, you've got a lot of talented sophomores, maybe a star freshman coming in, and he's just frankly not, the 12th, 13th, 14th best guy in the program come his senior year, or even, you talk about freshmen who make the freshman team, but there's just not room when it comes to, playing JV next year. Do you have to deal a lot with guys who, start as part of the program and just aren't really able to advance, up from freshman to JV or JV to varsity? Or do you try to, get guys who you've given an opportunity to get involved with the program to, see it through graduation?
What I would say to you is that we don't normally keep juniors on JV at that point. We feel like you had to matriculate into the varsity. So unless it's a unique guy that we think, the goal of the JV and the freshman is obviously to give a great experience, but to develop guys for future varsity competition. So, we're not going to keep juniors on JV. I don't think we've ever done that in my 25 years at O'Connell, except maybe once. So, it's not a hard fast rule, but it's a pretty standard rule. And then obviously, I'm a big believer as the athletic director. I implemented this, and I did take this from my dad, is that everyone deserves an individual talk because they had the courage to come out for the team. It takes courage to come out for a team. I'm sure there's guys in the cafeteria that says I could have made the team if I felt like it, or all those different things. To always give the respect of never posting a cut list, talking to guys individually, because I believe they had the courage to come out for the team. We owe them that level of respect and care. Talk to them individually. So I think the more you can do that, is there disappointment? Absolutely. But it doesn't mean that you need to be disrespectful. I think you can do it with care and a personal touch.
Yeah, and it sounds a little easier to handle. Maybe you won't be doing that with guys who have been in the program for 3 years. It would more so be a freshman who doesn't make the JV team, which is, you played a year. There's not really as much of an expectation that you're going to get through the whole thing. It's kind of known that you go out for the freshman team, you may or may not make JV next year. And then, for sophomores, maybe on JV, where you say, hey, look, you're not ready after the season. Hey, look, you're not ready for varsity, and we don't really keep junior guys on JV because we're trying to, this is just kind of how we do things. So it's easier probably to let guys down. I mean, still very disappointing, I'm sure, but after their freshman or sophomore year, as opposed to maybe after their junior year.
Absolutely. And I think that it also goes back to, we want to treat them the way we want our own sons or daughters treated. And that means that we're honest with them. I think if you're, and I call it, brutal honesty. And the reason I say brutal is because what I found when I was a young coach, as coaches, we're upbeat, we're positive. Hey, we're going to be great. We're going to move on to the next game. And so if I said like to a kid, you really need to work on your ball handling or you're not going to be able to, make the varsity. If I say like, hey, Jake, you got to work on your ball handling and really, really get better at it, but you're going to be great. You're going to work hard all summer. They kind of take that as they don't understand the importance of how important the ball handling is. So I call it brutal honesty. Like, if you don't get better at your ball handling, and I believe you can, but if you don't work on it every day, I don't see you making the varsity. And the reason I that's and probably shouldn't say brutal honesty, direct honesty is don't mince words. Because I think as coaches, we have a way to say things positively, but then sometimes the message gets lost. So, but don't be rude, but be direct on what they need to get better at. They don't come back and say, Coach, I didn't realize how important that was. I want to be very honest with my guys. This is what I need from you to get better at in the offseason.
Right. So, switching gears a little bit, if it's whether it's freshmen incoming or transfers, are you guys doing recruiting at the high school level, or how do you think about sort of sourcing the talent for the program overall?
Yeah, I mean, obviously everyone's recruiting, and my wife is an athletic trainer by trade, and now is the director of the nomination selection process, and is our camp administrator for Coach Wooten's basketball camp, which is one of the largest camps in the country, and actually the oldest in the country. Was started in '61 by my dad and Joe Gallagher, and people told him kids won't play basketball in the summer, so think about that. Um, but the big thing is this: is going back to recruiting is I think we're always developing relationships. We're always trying to, promote our programs. I think, she was an athletic trainer at Centerville and they were public school and they did a great job of grassroots and they'd have their middle school come to the game and have middle school night and things like that. So I think we're all recruiting. I think sometimes recruiting it's a negative thing because everybody thinks that means scholarship or that means, free. And I don't think it always does. It means promoting your program, like our crew team at O'Connell, which is a rowing team, does a great job of recruiting kids that never rowed before. So I think, we're all, any good coach is trying to develop their program and bring quality people. I know my father would always say, good values attract good people. And so I think if people know you have good values, then you're a step ahead.
Right. So you mentioned the camp, which has been going on for a long time, like you said, giving kids the opportunity to play over the summer. AAU sort of being another, thing that's developed outside of the high school and college game. What's like, I don't know what the status was or if AAU even existed when you started coaching, but maybe you could just kind of talk about how AAU has become a thing and how you view it as a high school coach. Do you involve yourself with AAU at all? And, I know your father was prolific about helping kids, select the right college for themselves and everything like that. And now it's like more of a split thing, I think, between the high school coach and AAU and even the parents. So how has AAU kind of changed basketball for the high school kids?
I think it's gone through a couple things that throughout the time. And so, for example, I think initially high school coaches didn't know how to deal with AAU, frankly, because it was new. The high school coaches had always done summer league, and it was kind of like, whoa, this is not the way things are done. And then I think as time evolved, it started to be that hey, high school coaches had to adapt and understand that AAU was here to get us, to grow the game, be better for the game. And then I think we adapted as high school coaches to work with AAU teams to, help the kids overall. And I think it's actually, where the high school coaches for a couple of years really weren't involved in recruiting and nearly as much as they once had been. Then it changed to, no, they are involved in recruiting, because now there's the scholastic period the NCAA has, and June has become a bigger month. So I think, I think one thing that, is important in any profession is the constant adaptation, the constant, ability to grow and develop and, adjust. And so I think it's actually in a really good place right now for the high school kid as they get the playing experience of AAU, and then they get the a different experience in high school. And I think high school is able to provide different things, and I think kids grow from every experience. And I think that's the way I approach it. They'll always have to grow.
Does AAU interfere at all with high school for you, like in season?
No, it really doesn't. I feel for our club soccer coaches because our soccer coaches because they have to actually deal with soccer during the actual season, where AAU is not during our high school season. So they actually complement each other. So, for example, we go through, basically mid March to the end of March, and from there AAU starts up and then runs through kind of May, and then June becomes the high school month for the evaluation periods by the NCAA, and then AAU in July. So I think one of the big things that I try to do is try to work with them, and it goes back to like colleges. Some kids ask for more help. Some kids say, how can I, what do you think, those types of things, and some kids say less. So I think again, it depends on the individual kid, and you provide help when needed and feedback when needed.
Right. And then so if I'm a young guy trying to, coach at a higher and higher level and get better at it, should I be thinking about coaching AAU? Is high school a nice path to stay on for a while? And then so that's sort of one question for like the young rising coach, but then actually for you, I'm curious, have you ever considered, I know it's been almost 25 years, have you considered coaching at the college level, or is high school where you want to be?
Well, I was in college my first year first year out of college at Furman University, and was an assistant there, and it was a great experience. But I kind of felt like in high school you get them as young boys, and they grow into young men, and so you have a great opportunity to work with them and help develop them. And I always say this, I think activity breeds activity. So I think being involved in basketball as much as you can, and in many ways as you can, makes you a better coach, makes a player a better player. So, good examples is you go to a gym and you hear about a good player from a parent that you weren't in the gym to see. And so I think, if you're not in the gym, you're never going to hear that. So I think being in the gym, working guys out, getting in the weight room, being involved with the basketball community makes you a better coach.
All right, and then let's talk a little bit about the philosophy you bring to Bishop O'Connell in terms of like the main principles driving the basketball program. Like I was fortunate to talk to the coach of Yale's team, and he had like sort of three big things that he credited with really turning around Yale's program. I think it was like 10 years into his coaching that he really established, okay, oh, this is what we do. And it was like rebounding, defense, and sharing the basketball. Do you have core principles that year in and year out you're focusing the guys on certain things, or is it sort of adapting based on the personnel you have in a given season?
I would say you always have your core principles, but I think the ability to adapt is vital. So, for example, I would say I think there's probably some intangibles. Obviously, what you spoke of is tangible: defense, rebounding, things that you can work on, and obviously you're going to have those. I think it's got to start with defense. It's got to start with rebounding. And I love sharing the basketball, and obviously, making the right basketball play would be a way I would say it. But I think from an intangible or an intangible, I think it's got to be a combination of be a part of something bigger than yourself. And I think what we always say is we say belief, honesty, and collective responsibility. So believe in what the coaches are saying, believe in yourself, believe in what you need to do to get better. And I know Coach K always calls it instant belief. He doesn't have time for you to evaluate in the middle of a game whether what he says is right. We need instant belief. We need, we call it collective responsibility. It's us together. It's ownership. I know Jay Wright will talk about attitude. And then we talk about honesty, like just having direct conversations with guys. And like, if they're, and I think one thing we've done before, which I'd like to do even more, is have, we used to do mid-season check-ins with each player, monthly check-ins with each player, maybe going to weekly check-ins and saying, where do you see things? This is where I see things. This is what I see as your strengths. This is what I think you're bringing to the table. And I've never gone to that, but it's probably something I probably should do.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. I know the intangibles can be just as meaningful as the tangible things. Obviously, you can work on the tangibles in practice, but if you don't have the intangibles going in, it makes the whole thing pretty difficult. Are you guys doing scouting of other teams pretty heavily? Are you game planning for upcoming opponents, or are you mostly focused on sort of doing what you do best? And maybe you have a couple of, nits on the team that you're about to play, but in general, you're playing your game and not worrying too much about the other team.
No, we definitely scout, and we do basically. I'll watch at least 1 to 2 game films that we can get with Huddle now. It's pretty easy to get game film, and so I watch game film, and then my assistant teacher is assigned to scout, and basically they're going to give a sketch on each player as well as video. There maybe 3 clips on them as players, what they like to do. So we're going to make this guy put the ball on the floor. We're going to play the drive on this guy. We're going to there's a charge candidate, those types of things. And then we show that, 3 clips on each player video wise. And then we actually also show what we call style of play. So we'll show 10 to 12 clips on the team and how they play.
Yeah, so one of the things that I thought was really interesting from the book that I've heard echoed. I've read a bunch of John Wooden's books as well. Very similar tone to coaching basketball successfully in a lot of ways. Mainly like the core philosophies I think. But one of the things talked about in both by John Wooden and by you and your father is not talking too much about winning. I think in Wooden's book you'll see guys, some of his players quoted like they never even heard John Wooden mention winning. And being in the season myself, I definitely appreciate the value of that. And I don't think I talked about winning very much. I really buy into the concept of putting forth a winning effort and giving it your all. And you can't control the outcome. The score takes care of itself. You do all the little things right. But do you find yourself talking about winning a decent amount, or do you try to subscribe to that principle yourself?
I like on my dad's scouting report. He used to just, what must we do to win? So it's more of a focus for the coaches, like what do we need to do to make the kids successful. But I think we talk more about a winning effort, what successful teams do. So I know one of my father's favorite statements is successful teams are willing to do what unsuccessful teams are not willing to do, and successful players are willing to do what unsuccessful players are not willing to do. Maybe they get on the floor for a loose ball. Maybe it's sprint back on defense. So you would talk about winning effort, talk about what leads to success, but not the win, not the almighty win itself, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And then, so one more question, it's kind of higher level, and then I actually want to get into what your guys' practices look like on an individual practice, and then how they develop over the course of the season. But the higher level question is around sort of how you've built your coaching knowledge over the last 25 years or so. Are there certain books that you're going back to time and time again? Obviously, you've got a lot of learnings from your father. Are you, digging into a bunch of YouTube videos? How do I think about like systematically building, coaching knowledge over a long period of time?
I think one of the big things with coaching knowledge is you have, again, that old statement, activity breeds activity. So the idea would be we would take the approach, like one of the best things I do every summer is go to camp. And one of the reasons I say that is, number one, it tells you why you got into coaching, because of the connection with the kids, and you love teaching basketball and you love working with young people. And I think that's what camp is. There's no politics, just no parents, kids playing basketball and having a lot of fun. So I think that's really important, to do that. And then like what we do every day at the camp, we do a coaches roundtable, and that roundtable gives you, as you talk about the game and you talk about how you talk about how you're going to attack an offense and defense, how you help your guys get hired as assistants to become head high school coaches or college assistants. It stirs your brain. So I think scouting, you're watching film and you see what other teams do, you see trends, you see different things. It makes you a student of the game. Being at clinics, which is like what I call our coaches roundtable, and speaking at clinics, I think again, all that just allows you to develop your philosophy and allows you to continue to grow with the game. I think this. I think if you watch a game, and this is something that I think very few coaches. We're all fans of the game. We all love the game. But as you watch an NBA or college game, you start to watch the ball and you start to watch everything that's, oh, wow, what a great shot. What a great player. But do you watch what really is affecting the outcome of the game? So I think you have to approach the game like, what is affecting the game here? Is it the defense? Is it the offense? The tempo? Is it an individual player coming off screens? Is it scoring inside? So I think you have to approach the game as a technician, as a clinician, not as a fan.
Right. What are you, further to that point, what are you watching for during your games? What are you focused on versus what do you maybe have some of your assistants paying special attention to?
So, and I want to be honest, that's always a challenge to find because a lot of assistants want to be, I think you have to coach your coaches. They want to be, kind of like the head coach, if that makes sense, because they end up wanting to watch the game. So I think it's really important, you give them specific assignments and say, all right, what are you watching in the game? What are you watching? Are you watching the big men? Are you watching how many times we're going to the offensive glass? Are you watching our defense? I'm trying to get an overall feel for the overall game, whereas they're getting a feel for the individual parts of the game because I think that's where they can see it the best.
Right. And then for you, you're focused on really being able to like sort of stay in the feel of the game and when to substitute guys and things like that.
Correct. For a while I tried to do like write down the subs, but and again, it helped me think about how to sub and manage your minutes. Where all right, I'm going to put in Johnny. You know, I'm going to put Johnny in. With 2 minutes to go in the first quarter and things like that. But it also allows you, to write it down gives you a feel, but at the same time, it also you need to make sure that you're coaching on feel as well.
Yeah, there's I forget the exact saying, but it's like the plans are basically it's worth making a plan, but not necessarily sticking to the plan. So creating the plan is helpful, but then you need to actually adapt to what's going on in the moment.
Yeah, I know the military says all plans are great until the bullets start flying.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
so you got to be able to adapt.
Great. And then, like I mentioned earlier, would love to sort of hear a typical practice layout for you guys, or if it's not one typical practice, maybe a representative few days of what practices might look like. And then once we get into sort of like what an individual practice might be, how they sort of develop from, preseason before there's any games, how much time you have to just do practice, practice, practice early on in the season, and then how practices might change over the course of the season.
So I think you have to focus on the fact that you can tell the kids that have been taught something time and time again. So repetition is the great teacher. I think you have to work on individual skill. I think you have to work on things that you have to shoot. You have to shoot free throws. You have to shoot a game speed. So I think one of my big opinions in basketball, and I think most coaches feel this way, is individual trainers are not good for basketball. And one of the reasons is they teach skill, but they don't teach applicableness. That's not a word, but things aren't applicable. To me, every skill I teach has to be applicable to the game. So, for example, we were working yesterday on stepping into your catch. And why do we step into our catch? Because number one, if they close out and now you've established your pivot foot, you can explode off your pivot foot. I think you have to have that approach of what affects the game. So for example, another thing we were working on was making reads at the rim. Really good scorers I've coached can have different tricks in their bag around the rim. The average scorers only score one way at the rim. They can shoot a layup or that. So I think it's really vital as a coach and if you're an effective trainer is to say, all right, I'm not teaching them skill. I'm teaching them how to utilize the skill to make reads, things like that. Because I think that's how guys develop IQ. So to me, that's really important. So I think, and I'll say this, I think it depends on if it's the day before a game, if it's preseason, if it's, we're allowed now to do workouts in the off season and even, do practice drills. So I think you have to constantly remind yourself, get your players better, develop a mentality for the team, and then that player leadership. Like one of the big challenges we were invited to the Throne, which is the national tournament coming up at the end of March. We're really going to focus on three things: getting stronger in the weight room, which I think is vital and has changed a lot I've done a poor job with that as a coach. I need to own that and get better at it. And we're going to do that of really making weights year round. The thought was you don't lift or maintain lift in the season. I think you got to lift year round. I think we got to get stronger. I think we have to develop our ability to score in different ways, like the reads at the rim, different things that guys know their strengths. And then I think we need player leadership. That's one of the things that I look for in terms of, and player leadership shows itself in so many ways. Who's your hardest worker? Who sets the tone of this is how we practice every day, that we show up and I'm treating it like it's a game. That's one type of leader. Another leader is with your voice. Another leader is with your coachability. Are you getting better at being coached so that you can obviously grow as a player? And I think that's vital to success.
Right. And then so you mentioned sort of owning the need to get better in the gym and weightlifting. Obviously, whenever you take time and allocate it towards something else that you think needs more time, it sort of comes with some kind of cost. Are you going to sacrifice, some number of practices during the season and dedicate them to weightlifting days, or how do you plan to sort of actually implement that improvement in weightlifting and actually incorporate that throughout the season?
So one of the things we're going to do is for this year to end the year, we're going to lift after school, but our goal is to get everybody in strength and conditioning as a class. And then one of the abilities that does that takes care of it during the day. We already have strength and conditioning as a class in our school, and so that allows us to utilize that time, because there's only so much time during the day. So that's the bell. There's only so much time during the day that you can allocate. So I think you have to again utilize all the resources that you can harness for your advantage.
Yeah, that sounds like a great way to do it. One of the other things that stood out from the book was from both you and your father, I think, is the emphasis on the fast break as sort of a primary scoring option for the offense. I think at the time you wrote you expect roughly 33% of your points to come from fast break, 33% from half court offense, 20% off defense, and 14% off of offensive boards. How do you guys actually double down on the importance of fast break and are there any particular drills that you love to do to get the team sort of oriented around looking to score in the fast break first and foremost?
What's interesting? We really didn't have that team this year that could score out of the fast break, because I think our decision making wasn't good. So I think you have to emphasize it, but you also have to adapt for each team. So for this year's team, that did not work as well for us, and so we adapted and made it more of a half court game. So I think again, as a coach, you have to adapt to what the strengths of your team are. But I think again, we like to say is it's not what you coach, it's what you emphasize. So I think if you emphasize things day to day, and you how do you emphasize that? By talking about it a lot, by rewarding it, by doing the drills, by making that your style of play. So again, I think it has to be a little bit different for each team, but definitely adapt as the team moves on.
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense. So, final question for you. Obviously, every basketball coach has some level of love for the game, but you mentioned earlier about, your reasoning for doing it at the high school level is you really have this opportunity to help mold and sort of develop these kids that isn't necessarily the same at the college level. High school is just like this very unique time where you're really still, turning from a kid to a man, like you mentioned, between in those 4 years. So it's an awesome experience. That's why part of why I at least loved it so much. And I'm curious, have you had any sort of favorite coaching moments or stories from whether it's this season or past seasons, just like a really great story to sort of encapsulate why you do what you do, why you love being a high school basketball coach.
So I mean, I think this. I think sometimes you think you're going to have an ability to reach a kid that you think you're going to reach, and you think you make this big impact on them, and you don't reach them as well. And then there's other kids that you thought didn't listen to you, and you impact them more than you realize. So I think it's one of those things where you never know who you're impacting, and sometimes they can be surprising who got it and surprising who didn't get it. So again, I think that I've always found that fascinating. Like a guy that you feel like you're reaching, maybe you don't reach, and then a guy that you thought didn't listen, you reached it immensely. And so I think that's the challenge. So you have to continue to do the right thing. And sometimes the players don't appreciate it that time, but they appreciate it down the road.
Awesome. Well, thank you for all of this. I really appreciate the time and perspective, and it's been a great opportunity for me to ask some of these questions. So I really appreciate it. If people want to sort of follow you and what you're doing, or check out the camp, what's the best place for people to go to learn more about you and the program and the camp and everything you're doing?
I think I would encourage guys to come. One thing we do is with our campus, we have a lot of coaches come work it, and I've seen again that goes back to activity breeds activity. Not because you're working our camp, but it's a way to network and meet people and learn to teach the game and things like that. And we have that coaches clinic each day. So I've find some of my good assistants. I've had 16 head high school coaches since I've started at O'Connell, move on from being my assistant to being their own head coach. And I really pride myself on that, but I find them from camp because they're guys that want to work, guys that love the game, guys that want to study the game. And so, we have our campus, coachwootten.com. It's Coach Wooten's basketball camp, but it's coach and then WOOTTEN.com. And then, we have also BishopO'Connell.org is our high school. But, to me, I love camp because I think it helps guys develop and it helps guys get better as coaches and as players.
Awesome. Well, thank you again. I really appreciate it, and best of luck with the rest of the season, and then camp this summer.
I enjoyed it, and let's stay in touch.